In this video, we'll be talking about cellular respiration, which involves the processes glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and electron transport system, and lactate fermentation. Cellular respiration is defined as a set of metabolic reactions and processes that take place in the cells of organisms to convert biochemical energy from nutrients into adenosine triphosphate, ATP, and then release waste products. The reactions involved in respiration, which are glycolysis, Krebs cycle, electron transport system, and lactation, fermentation, are catalytic reactions that break large molecules into smaller ones. The process is a series of chemical reactions that take place in three stages: glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and ETS, or electron transport chain. A cellular respiration can take place with or without oxygen, so in anaerobic or aerobic processes, and both of the processes start with glycolysis. Glycolysis is called the sugar splitting, and it occurs in the cytosol or the cytoplasm.
Service now, you can automate complex
It splits the 6-carbon glucose into 3-carbon sugars, and it has 2 phases. One is the energy investment, which spends ATP, which then becomes ADP, as seen in the diagram. And then it has the energy payoff, where ATP is made through substrate phosphorylation, which is over here, when the ADP turns back into ATP. The 2 molecules produced are called pyruvate, and in eukaryotes, the pyruvate enters the mitochondria and is oxidized to a compound called acetyl-CoA, which then enters the Krebs cycle. Glycolysis occurs whether or not O2 is available, and if oxygen is available, the chemical energy stored in pyruvate and NADH can be extracted via pyruvate oxidation, the Krebs cycle, which occurs after this cycle, and the oxidative phosphorylation. The net energy yield per glucose molecule is 2 ATP and 2 NADH. And this is glycolysis. Next, we have the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle is also called the citric acid cycle. And it occurs when acetyl-CoA, which was first produced in glycolysis, is produced in aerobic respiration. That means oxygen is present. The citric acid cycle is an 8-step process involving 18 different enzymes and coenzymes. During the cycle, acetyl-CoA and oxalate yield citrate, 6 carbons, which is rearranged to a more reactive form called isocitrate, which also has 6 carbons. Isocitrate is modified to become beta-ketoglutarate, cisyl-CoA, also called synthase, formate, malate, and finally oxalate. After this process, the electron transport system, also called ETS, is formed. ETS, also called the electron transport system, is the final step of electron a cellular respiration, and it takes place in the inner mitochondrial membrane. This is the step where most of the energy is made. At the end, H2O and ATP are made. The ETS system creates the most amount of ATP throughout the entire system. As seen in this diagram over here, in glycolysis, only 2 ATP were made. In the Krebs cycle, only 2 ATP were made. But in the electron transport system, a total of 34, about 34, it depends, are made, making a grand total of 38 ATP. Finally, and since cellular respiration can occur in anaerobic and aerobic processes, there are 2 different ways that this could go. If oxygen is present, then the system follows after glycolysis. It turns into acetyl-CoA, which then goes into the Krebs cycle and ends with the electron transport chain. But if oxygen is not present, the system still begins with glycolysis, but instead it goes on to the lactate fermentation. As can be seen here, it begins with glycolysis, but then and 2 ATP molecules are still used in the system, but instead it ends with lactic acid instead of acetyl-CoA, which is seen in processes with oxygen. So, in conclusion, in the cellular respiration, there are 3 stages called glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and electron transport chain, and aerobic, which means their oxygen is present, systems. If there is no oxygen present, the system still goes through glycolysis, but instead goes through lactate fermentation, which ends with lactic acid formation. Lactic acid is without oxygen present.